March 19, 1945, 0707 hours, 50 miles off the coast of Japan. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Gary stands in the forward damage control station aboard USS Franklin, monitoring reports from repair parties throughout the massive aircraft carrier. Franklin is preparing to launch her morning strike against Japanese airfields. 31 aircraft spotted on the flight deck, engines running, bombs and rockets loaded, fuel tanks topped off. Everything is ready. Through the ship's intercom, Gary hears the air officer announce, "Launch aircraft, commence flight operations." Then, at 0708 hours, a lookout's voice cuts through the routine. "Bogey! Bogey! Single aircraft diving from starboard!" Gary has perhaps 3 seconds to understand what's happening. A Japanese Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, concealed in low clouds, has penetrated Franklin's combat air patrol and is diving toward the carrier from 6,000 feet. The 5-inch anti-aircraft guns open fire, too late. At 0708 hours and 15 seconds, the Japanese pilot releases 2 550-pound bombs from 100 feet and pulls out of his dive. Both bombs strike U.S. Franklin's flight deck. The first bomb penetrates the wooden deck and explodes in the hangar bay, detonating among 22 aircraft being armed and fueled for the next strike. The second bomb penetrates further, exploding in the second deck among ready ammunition rooms and aviation fuel storage. Within 5 seconds, Franklin transforms from a functioning warship into a floating inferno. The bomb's explosions trigger secondary detonations. Armed aircraft on the hangar deck explode, their bombs and rockets adding to the carnage. Aviation fuel ignites, creating a firestorm with temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Ammunition magazines cook off, sending shells ricocheting through compartments. On the flight deck, the 31 fully armed aircraft explode in rapid succession. 500-pound bombs detonate. Tiny TIM rockets, each weighing 1,300 pounds with 500 pounds of explosive, launch themselves across the deck, smashing into the island's superstructure or flying off into the ocean. Men standing near aircraft are incinerated instantly. Others are thrown overboard by explosions. Still others are trapped in compartments below as fire spreads through ventilation systems and elevator shafts. In the first 60 seconds after the Japanese bombs hit, 304 men die. In the next hour, 420 more will die, killed by fire, explosions, smoke inhalation, or drowning in flooded compartments. USS Franklin, with 724 dead and over 265 wounded, will become the most heavily damaged aircraft carrier to survive World War II. But only because men like Joseph Gary refused to abandon her. Context: the Carrier War. By March 1945, the Pacific War has reached Japan's doorstep. American carrier task forces operate within striking distance of the Japanese home islands, launching raids against airfields, factories, and shipping. The Essex class, carriers that form the backbone of these task forces, are the most powerful warships in the world, displacing 2,700 tons, carrying 90-100 aircraft, capable of projecting devastating air power anywhere in the Pacific. But carriers are also vulnerable. A carrier's flight deck must be open to launch and recover aircraft, meaning it can't be heavily armored. The hangar bays below the flight deck contain dozens of aircraft, thousands of gallons of aviation fuel, and tons of bombs and rockets. If fire reaches the hangar bay, the carrier becomes a floating bomb. American naval architects understood this vulnerability. Essex-class carriers were designed with extensive damage control systems, multiple fire pumps, redundant power systems, hundreds of watertight compartments, and sophisticated ventilation controls to prevent fire spread. Most importantly, every carrier had damage control parties, trained teams of sailors responsible for fighting fires, containing flooding, and keeping the ship operational even after catastrophic damage. Damage control became a defining characteristic of American naval warfare. Where Japanese and British carriers often sank after single bomb hits, American carriers survived multiple hits through aggressive damage control. USS Yorktown at Midway took 3 bomb hits and 2 torpedo hits before finally sinking, and stayed afloat for 2 days while damage control parties fought to save her. USS Bunker Hill in May 1945 survived 2 kamikaze hits that killed 393 men and destroyed 30 aircraft. but stayed afloat and returned to port under her own power. The philosophy was simple. American carriers were too valuable to abandon. Each carrier represented 2 years of construction, trained air wings, and irreplaceable combat capability. If there was any chance of saving the ship, damage control parties would fight until they died or succeeded. USS Franklin would test that philosophy to its absolute limit. The ship, USS Franklin, CV-13, was commissioned in January 1904. She was an Essex-class fleet carrier, 872 feet long, 93-foot beam, displacing 36,380 tons fully loaded. Power plant, 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers producing 150,000 shaft horsepower, driving 4 propeller shafts, maximum speed 33 knots. Armament, 12 5-inch dual-purpose guns, 68 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 55 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Aircraft complement, 36 F-6F Hellcat fighters, 36 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, 18 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. Crew, 3D-48 officers and men. By March 1945, Franklin had completed 4 combat deployments, participating in operations from the Philippines to Iwo Jima. She'd launched thousands of sorties, her aircraft had destroyed hundreds of Japanese aircraft and ships, and she'd earned 4 battle stars. Her crew was experienced, her aircraft well-maintained, her damage control organization drilled and ready, but no amount of preparation could fully prepare them for what happened on March 19th. Inferno. On the flight deck, the Japanese bombs struck at the worst possible moment. Franklin's flight deck was crowded with 31 fully armed aircraft, engines running, preparing to launch. Each aircraft carried a full fuel load, 180 gallons in internal tanks. Each dive bomber carried a 1,000-pound bomb. Each fighter carried 6 5-inch rockets. The hangar bay below contained 22 more aircraft, also armed and fueled for the next strike. When the first Japanese bomb exploded in the hangar bay, it created a chain reaction of catastrophic proportions. The initial explosion destroyed 4 aircraft immediately, rupturing their fuel tanks and detonating their ordnance. Those explosions triggered adjacent aircraft, their bombs exploding, fuel igniting, rockets launching randomly. Within 30 seconds, the entire hangar bay was ablaze. Temperatures reached 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt aluminum aircraft structures and ignite anything flammable. The fire spread through open elevator shafts to the flight deck above, where it found 31 more fully loaded aircraft. Aviation Ordnance Man 3rd Class Robert Blanchard was standing near a TBM Avenger on the flight deck when the bombs hit. The explosion threw him 40 feet across the deck, slamming him against a gun mount. When he regained consciousness, he found himself surrounded by fire. Aircraft were exploding all around me, Blanchard later recalled. I saw a Tiny Tim rocket launch from a burning Helldiver, fly across the deck, and punch through the island's superstructure. I saw men on fire running toward the edge of the deck and jumping overboard. I saw a 500-pound bomb cook off and blow an F-6F completely off the ship. It was like being inside hell. Blanchard crawled toward the starboard side, dragging a wounded shipmate. When he reached the edge of the flight deck, he looked down at the ocean 60 feet below. Behind him, the entire flight deck was a sea of flame. He jumped, still holding his wounded shipmate. Both men survived, pulled from the water by the destroyer USS Miller. On the bridge, Captain Leslie Garris realized immediately that Franklin was in mortal danger. The fire on the flight deck was beyond control. Explosions were occurring every few seconds as aircraft ordnance cooked off. The hangar bay was completely engulfed. Smoke was pouring from ventilation shafts throughout the ship, and Franklin was listing 13 degrees to starboard, either from flooding or from the weight of water being pumped onto fires. "All hands, prepare to abandon ship," Garris ordered at 0745 hours. The order was broadcast throughout the ship, but not everyone heard it. In compartments filled with smoke, with intercom systems damaged by explosions, hundreds of men never received the abandoned ship order. They stayed at their posts, fighting fires, rescuing wounded, and trying to save their ship. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Gary never heard the abandoned ship order. He was too busy organizing firefighting parties in the forward section of the ship. Gary was Franklin's first lieutenant, the officer responsible for all damage control operations. At 29 years old, He'd served aboard Franklin since her commissioning, training damage control parties obsessively, because he understood that carriers survive through disciplined damage control, not luck. His philosophy was simple: compartmentalize the damage, fight fires aggressively, maintain ship stability, never give up. The ship will tell you when she's dying, Gary told his damage control teams during training. Until she tells you, until she's actually sinking beneath your feet, you keep fighting. You don't abandon ship because it looks bad. You abandon ship when there's physically nothing left to save. When the Japanese bombs hit, Gary was in Damage Control Central, a protected compartment deep in the ship where all damage reports converged. Within 2 minutes of the attack, his status boards showed catastrophic damage: flight deck, uncontrolled fires, multiple aircraft explosions. Hangar bay, complete conflagration, temperatures above 2,000 degrees. Second deck, fires spreading, ammunition magazines threatened. Third deck, flooding in multiple compartments from ruptured fire mains. Engineering spaces, intact but threatened by spreading fires. The logical assessment was that Franklin was doomed, but Gary rejected that assessment. "We've still got power," he told his assistant. "We've still got fire mains. We've still got trained men. That means we can fight this." He immediately dispatched repair parties to critical areas. Repair Party 5 to the hangar bay, their mission: contain the fire before it spread to the ship's magazines. Repair Party 2 to the flight deck, their mission: push burning aircraft overboard to reduce the fire load. Repair Party 7 to flooding compartments, their mission: stop leaks and prevent the ship from capsizing. Each repair party consisted of 20-30 men equipped with firefighting gear, breathing apparatus, and tools for cutting through bulkheads or shoring up damaged structures. They were trained to work in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees, in smoke so thick they couldn't see 6 inches ahead, in compartments filling with water or toxic gases, and they were trained never to retreat unless ordered. Fighting the impossible, Repair Party 5, led by Chief Machinist's mate Robert Wassman, entered the hangar bay at 0730 hours. The scene was apocalyptic. Aircraft wreckage burned throughout the bay, creating multiple fires impossible to count. Ammunition was still cooking off, machine gun rounds popping like firecrackers, larger shells exploding with concussions that knocked men off their feet. The overhead, the ceiling of the hangar bay, was buckled and sagging from the heat, threatening to collapse. And bodies were everywhere, men killed by the initial explosions or overcome by smoke. "We can't put this out," one of Wassman's men said, his voice muffled by his breathing apparatus. "It's too big." "We're not trying to put it out," Wassman replied. "We're trying to contain it. Keep it from spreading aft to the magazines. If it reaches the magazines, the whole ship blows." Repair Party 5 dragged fire hoses forward, directing streams of water not at the fires themselves, which were too hot and too large to extinguish, but at the bulkheads and decks surrounding the fires. Their goal was to cool the metal enough to prevent fire from spreading through the heat conduction. They worked for 20 minutes before the heat drove them back. Temperatures in the hangar bay exceeded 190 even away from the fires, hot enough that men's clothing began smoldering, rubber gas mask seals began melting, and breathing became painful despite respirators. "Fall back to the aft end of the hangar bay," Wassman ordered. "We'll make our stand there." Repair Party 5 retreated 100 feet aft, establishing a new position where they could prevent fire spread while staying far enough from the heat to survive. They would maintain that position for the next 3 hours. On the flight deck, Repair Party 2 faced a different challenge. The deck was covered with burning aircraft that continued exploding. Their mission, pushing burning wreckage overboard, required getting close enough to hook chains to aircraft, then using deck tractors to drag them to the edge. It was incredibly dangerous work. Seaman First Class Gary Kidd was operating a deck tractor when a tiny Tim rocket on a burning Helldiver suddenly ignited. The rocket launched horizontally across the deck, passing so close to Kidd's tractor that he felt the heat on his face. The rocket struck the island's superstructure, punched through 2 bulkheads, and exploded inside a radio room, killing 3 men instantly. "I thought I was dead," Kidd later recalled. "That rocket missed me by maybe 5 feet. If it had hit my tractor, I'd have been vaporized. But I couldn't think about that. We had to keep pushing burning aircraft overboard before they exploded and killed more people." Repair Party 2 pushed 14 burning aircraft off Franklin's deck in the first hour. Each aircraft pushed overboard was one less source of fire and explosions threatening the ship. Below decks, Repair Party 7 fought flooding in compartments ruptured by bomb explosions. Chief Water Tender Charles Luttrell led his team through passageways knee-deep in water, searching for the sources of flooding. They found multiple ruptures in fire mains. Pipes that carried seawater for firefighting had been fractured by explosions, pouring thousands of gallons per minute into lower compartments. "We need to isolate these compartments," Luttrell said. "Close the watertight doors, accept the flooding here, and keep it from spreading." His men closed heavy, watertight doors, sealing off flooded compartments even though it meant abandoning equipment and spaces to the ocean. This was the fundamental principle of damage control: sacrifice parts of the ship to save the whole. By 8:30 hours, 82 minutes after the attack began, Franklin's damage control parties had achieved something remarkable. The fires were no longer spreading. The flooding was contained to 3 compartments. The ship's list had stabilized at 13 degrees, serious but not fatal, and Franklin was still afloat, still under power, still a functioning warship. Would you stay aboard a ship that admirals had ordered abandoned, or trust your training and fight to save her? Tell me in the comments. The cruiser's gamble. At 0900 hours, the heavy cruiser USS Pittsburgh approached Franklin to render assistance. Franklin was dead in the water. Her propulsion was still functional, but Captain Garris had ordered engines stopped because wind over the deck was feeding the fires. Pittsburgh maneuvered alongside Franklin and passed a towing cable. The evolution was extraordinarily dangerous. Franklin was still racked by explosions as ammunition cooked off. Her list meant Pittsburgh had to approach from the starboard side, where debris and burning aircraft might fall onto the cruiser. And if Franklin's magazines exploded, Pittsburgh would be destroyed as well. Pittsburgh's captain, John Gingrich, made the decision to risk his ship and one 400-man crew to save Franklin. "We don't abandon carriers just because they're damaged," Gingrich told his officers. "If there's a chance to save her, we take that chance." At 0930 hours, Pittsburgh began towing Franklin away from the Japanese coast at 3 knots. The tow would last for 3 hours until Franklin's engineers could restart her engines. During those 3 hours, Franklin's damage control parties continued fighting fires, rescuing wounded from sealed compartments and restoring systems. Lieutenant Commander Gary coordinated the effort from Damage Control Central. His status board now showed progress. Hangar bay fires, contained but not extinguished. Flight deck fires, mostly extinguished, remaining wreckage being pushed overboard. Flooding, stopped. Pumps slowly reducing water levels. Casualties, 724 confirmed dead, 265 wounded, approximately 100 crew still aboard. The casualty figures represented the attack's horrific toll. Over 2,700 men had been aboard Franklin when the attack began. Now, only 100 remained, the others killed, wounded, or having abandoned ship in the first chaotic hour. But those 100 men were saving their ship through sheer determination. At 12:30 hours, Franklin's chief engineer reported, "We can restart the engines, ready to answer bells." Captain Garris gave the order. "All ahead slow, cast off the tow." Pittsburgh released the towing cable. Franklin's propellers began turning. The carrier, listing, burned, with 724 dead still aboard, was moving under her own power. She would make it home. The long road home. Franklin's journey from the waters off Japan to Pearl Harbor took 23 days. She traveled at reduced speed, 12 knots maximum, because her damaged hull couldn't handle higher speeds. She was escorted by 4 destroyers and 2 cruisers, surrounded by protective combat air patrol in case Japanese aircraft attempted to finish what one bomber had started. Aboard Franklin, the damage control work continued. Repair parties fought spot fires that kept rekindling. They cut away twisted metal to clear passages. They shored up weakened bulkheads. They recovered bodies from compartments that could finally be entered. The body recovery was the hardest work. Many compartments had been sealed during the attack with men still inside. Men who'd been overcome by smoke, trapped by fire, or drowned by flooding. When repair parties finally opened these compartments, they found shipmates they had served with for months. "We'd find guys we knew," recalled Seaman Kidd. "Guys we'd eaten breakfast with that morning. Now they were dead, and we had to carry their bodies out. You can't train for that. You just do it because it's your duty to your shipmates." By the time Franklin reached Pearl Harbor on April 3, 1945, Repair parties had recovered 704 bodies. 20 more were never found, lost when they were blown overboard or trapped in sealed compartments that couldn't be opened without risking the ship. The Navy held a mass memorial service at Pearl Harbor for Franklin's dead. Over 5,000 sailors attended. Captain Garris spoke briefly. Franklin survived because her crew refused to give up. Some ships are saved by luck. This ship was saved by courage, training, and the determination of men who wouldn't abandon their shipmates. Franklin was too damaged to return to combat. She underwent temporary repairs at Pearl Harbor, then sailed to Brooklyn Navy Yard for extensive reconstruction. The repairs took until February 1946, after the war had ended. Franklin was decommissioned in 1947 and eventually scrapped in 1906, but her legacy lived on. Legacy of survival. USS Franklin's survival influenced American naval design and doctrine for decades. Her damage control success proved that carriers could survive catastrophic damage if crews were properly trained and if ships were designed with redundant systems. Post-war carrier designs incorporated lessons from Franklin. Improved fire suppression systems in hangar bays, better protection for aviation fuel storage, more watertight subdivisions to contain flooding, enhanced damage control training for all crew members. The Korean War carriers, Forrestal-class supercarriers, and modern Nimitz-class carriers all reflect Franklin's lessons. American carriers are designed to survive, and American crews are trained to save them. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Gary received the Navy Cross, the Navy's second highest decoration, for his damage control leadership. The citation noted that his outstanding courage, professional skill, and unwavering devotion to duty directly contributed to Franklin's survival. Gary remained in the Navy after the war, eventually achieving the rank of Rear Admiral. He spent much of his later career teaching damage control at the Naval Damage Control School, where he emphasized the same philosophy that saved Franklin. The ship will tell you when she's dying. Until then, you fight. Chief Machinist's mate Robert Wassman received the Silver Star for leading Repair Party 5's firefighting efforts in the hangar bay. He survived the war and returned to civilian life as a firefighter in Chicago, where his Navy training made him one of the city's most effective firefighters for 30 years. Captain Leslie Garris faced criticism for ordering abandoned ship too quickly. Some officers argued that the order caused unnecessary casualties as men jumped into the ocean or abandoned posts prematurely, but Garris defended his decision. I saw the damage, I saw the fires. I believed the ship was doomed. I was wrong, but I made the decision based on the information I had at that moment. Command means making decisions with incomplete information and accepting the consequences. The 724 men who died aboard Franklin represent the cost of carrier warfare. They died not in traditional combat, shot by enemy guns or torpedoes, but in the secondary effects of a single bombing attack. Killed by their own ordnance, their own aviation fuel, their own ship turned against them by 2 Japanese bombs. Their sacrifice highlights a truth about naval warfare. Ships don't just sink from enemy action. They sink from fire, flooding, explosions, and structural failure, all consequences of damage that must be controlled. American damage control excellence meant that ships like Franklin survived when enemy carriers would have sunk. Japanese carriers at Midway sank after single bomb hits. British carriers in the Mediterranean suffered catastrophic losses from relatively minor damage. But American carriers, Franklin, Bunker Hill, Enterprise, survived attacks that should have destroyed them. Because American sailors fought to save their ships with a determination that reflected American culture. Never give up, trust your training, and refuse to accept defeat. In crisis, would you follow orders to abandon ship or stay with your crew to fight for survival? I'm curious what you'd do. Among Franklin's 724 dead were men from every department and every rank. Aviation machinist's mate Donald Gary, Joseph Gary's younger brother, who had requested assignment to Franklin to serve with his brother, died in the hangar bay during the initial attack. He was 19 years old. Lieutenant Junior Grade McGregor Kilpatrick, a fighter pilot who had scored 7 aerial victories, died when his F-6F exploded on the flight deck. He was 23. Fire Controlman Second Class James O'Callahan, a Catholic chaplain who had received special permission to serve in combat, was killed while administering last rites to wounded men in a burning compartment. He was 38. Their names, and 721 others, are inscribed on a memorial plaque that was mounted aboard Franklin before she was scrapped. That plaque now resides at the Naval Academy Museum in Annapolis, Maryland. Visitors can read the names and remember that carrier warfare's cost wasn't just measured in sunken ships, but in individual lives, men with families, futures, and dreams who died serving their country aboard a ship that refused to sink. USS Franklin survived because her crew refused to abandon her, because damage control parties fought fires that should have been unbeatable, because officers like Joseph Gary trusted their training more than their fear, and because American naval culture emphasized that ships were worth saving, even at terrible cost. 724 men died aboard Franklin on March 19, 1945, but 2,000 men survived because of courage, training, and the determination to save something larger than themselves. Some ships are remembered for the battles they won. Franklin is remembered for refusing to die. These stories of sacrifice, determination, and impossible survival deserve to be remembered. Subscribe so they never fade into history. Next time, the fighter pilot who became an ace in a day, and the 5-minute dogfight that changed aerial combat tactics forever.